Greetings, it's I, Tempest Man Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome once more. Today is going to be an interesting day, because we are having a discussion on the classes of D&D 4e. If you're looking for a full guide and breakdown of all the different classes and all the different things you can do with those classes, that's not today. I might do one of those in the future. I might revisit some more D&D 4e, but what I wanted to do today is something that's a little bit more unique because I want to talk about it to give you an impression about how much material actually came out in D&D 4e and how to use it. I've had my guides and stuff that talk about the basics of character creation, so hopefully you've gone and seen these already, so you have a basic idea of how to play D&D 4e. Today's purpose is not only to talk about the large amount of class options there were by the time that D&D 4e ended, but to kind of give you an idea about the way they work to a degree. So let's get started then, because honestly, that's a great place to do. And I usually talk about books, but for today, I'm going to start with a webpage. Now, this is one I found during the week, when I was setting up for this. That is probably a pretty good place to go to. And this is a list of classes. And they come from a variety of different sources. Some things like the Dragon Magazine has versions of ones. We're not going to talk about the Dragon Magazine ones. Those are classes which are technically sort of actual classes. That's a... Dragon Magazine introduced a lot of stuff back then. This is a time period with the internet before we have a lot of things like what we have now with Unearthed Arcanas and stuff like that, where if you're getting stuff online, it's probably going to be very homebrewed and not very professional. You have to think about this, that if we look at these Dragon Magazines, the last one was published in 2011. That was 12 years ago, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for the online landscape, it really was. So the same amount of information was just not provided. And Dragon Magazine, which we can kind of take a look at here, I can open up a new thing of it, was basically a big thing. It was an official magazine source for Dungeons & Dragons. It had a big old history. Advertisements are trying to show up. But Dragon Magazine evolved and still kind of was there. So that's a thing to keep in mind. Dragon was there. It provided stuff that players could still technically use and was pretty close to being D&D adjacent. So things like the Assassin, a bunch of these hybrid classes exist from Dragon Magazine. So keep those in mind. Now, I guess what we should talk about are the two main things that are listed here. And I can take a look at them from the top. Role and power source. Let's go over to here for a second. Just put this over top of it. And take a look at role. I talked about role and I talked about my basic of character creation. But this is where we really have to hit into role a lot more important. Role is incredibly important for party dynamic when it comes to D&D 4e. Unlike a lot of other editions... Okay, let's put it this way. In a lot of other editions, you can make do. In early editions, you really needed a balanced party. And this is reflected pretty heavily by the time we get into 3rd edition. 3rd edition was the first point in time where you could break away to a degree from the balanced party. It gave you options with feats, spells, and other abilities and other very unique classes that started to break away from the traditional roles. Traditional roles being your the 4 main characters you'd have in a team. It would be fighter, rogue, wizard, and then they added in cleric, the healer. Really, the original one was fighter, rogue, wizard, but the cleric was an important part about it to mitigate a lot of deadliness. So those 4 would be it. And cleric was your main healer in the earliest editions. Not that there wasn't other ones that could fill the cleric role. There really wasn't a lot. It wasn't until 3rd where you have things like a bard could fill that role, a druid could fill that role. I'm sorry, in 2nd edition, maybe a little bit, but really I feel like it was very hard to take away from the cleric role in 2nd edition. So, we have roles. When we talk about modern D&D in 5e, those roles are fairly gone. Things like short rests and other abilities, make sure you don't have to worry about that. And a lot of modern games allow for not having roles or having characters that can fill those roles when they normally couldn't, allowing for options. Things like Pathfinder 2nd Edition certainly has a lot of ways that you could have spellcasters that fill those roles. You could have something like a primal caster that has some healing abilities and some abilities similar to a wizard in between there. It doesn't say that you don't have to have certain things. Like, I would say in 2nd edition, you should have at least a spellcaster, someone that either has really good medicine skill or healing spells, probably both technically, but you don't really need both. And then, like, certain things like you need someone to tank stuff. You need a frontliner. So like frontliner, spellcaster, really all the two you need, and then you just have to have people that generally fill in the blanks in various places, but it becomes more or less of a simple puzzle piece and more of a bunch of keys that mesh together when we build teams a lot more in modern day. And even in Pathfinder 1st edition, you find this more. It's interesting to see that you do not need necessarily things like an actual healer per se. You could have someone that uses a healing wand. Granted, again, without healing, you're not in great shape in a lot of older editions. And here is where these 4 come in. Really only need 2 of these. The other 2 are useful, but I'll kind of describe the order of which you need something in your team. You need a leader. I'm not going to lie, leaders are incredibly helpful. Granted, you could make do with a lot of builds without a leader if you really wanted to, but you have to have all your characters specialized in such a way that they would get a lot of healing, and that healing would keep them going. So, a leader becomes very important. They heal, they inspire, they be the ones that basically control the party and keep them going. They form a very important role. Similar to that, a defender is very important. They tank. They're the front line. They have abilities that make it enemies want to either focus on them or they can't get past them. They're the ones that basically keep the battle under control, because D&D 4e is a game about multiple enemies. 4e, I've talked about it before, but you have to consider it something a little different than your traditional D&Ds. It is an outlier in comparison to all the other D&Ds. There is a through line from 1st edition to 5th edition that does not go through 4th. And that's the big thing I have to say about it. There are little branches that connect with 4th, so it's not completely outside the realm, especially because those branches weave back into 5th. A lot of ideas that came up with in 4th hit into 5th. But again, it's the similar thing that you need these people that basically control the battle and keep things healed, and then keep the attention of the enemy. After that, a striker is important because they deal damage. That's their point. A lot of damage. They kill enemies quickly. They have their tricks of the trade. And after that, then you do get the controller, which is dealing with multiple enemies. But the thing is, you do not need a controller. In the first Player's Handbook, which I'm using this information for the Player's Handbook, they really on the wizard for controls. They added in a lot more controllers after here. But really having only one option to begin with meant that it's either you had a wizard or you didn't. And honestly speaking, you didn't need a wizard. Yes, they had a lot of abilities that could be very helpful to your team, but it's the last one you really don't need. After that, you might be able to get do without a striker. You'd be in a lot of trouble. You might be able to get do a lot of defender. You'd be in a lot of trouble. You might be able to get do without a leader. You'd be in a lot of trouble. That's the thing is, those 3 were kind of required for your team to function. And this is an unfortunate part about 4e. Again, you can maybe make do without it, but it's a lot of uphill battle. So, you've got an idea now where the classes are, kind of, and where we have to look at building our team and the importance of a lot of these classes. Class filling the role does not mean it works like another class in that role. That's an important part about this too. Each one of these classes does function differently in a way. Warlocks are meant for like a magical arcane blast that do a bunch of damage. Rogues have their sneak attack, which take advantage of openings and weak points to do extra damage. Rangers have enemies that they can kind of target and break down. Fighters are just that. They are ones that are basically your standard combatants. Paladins have, unique divine abilities that offer them extra protections to survive rather than relying on martial abilities. Clerics, again, have various abilities that are more magical based, which do healing and blasting kind of thing a little bit, while a warlord is more like a inspirational fighter. And of course, wizard is just a wizard. But again, since we don't have spells and abilities the same way we did in a lot of other editions, it breaks down a lot differently too, because even if we take each of these individual classes and talk about them, one wizard can be different from another wizard vastly for much more reasons than just, it's a wizard, it's an elf or a dwarf. Your species / race does take a big part of that. Your ability scores do take a big part about it, because going back to our list here, you can notice that ability scores are listed. I'm going to switch this from sources to roles for a minute here. Now, remember how we had only wizard in the player's handbook? Look at the list of controllers by the time it was done. The player's handbook 3 introduced a whole bunch of ones. And the hybrid ones, we'll talk about those a little bit, but they also introduced like a couple different types of wizards, a different type of hunter, a different type of druid, and then we got all your defenders, defender and striker, leaders, and then strikers. There was a lot of strikers. Strikers I feel like out of the most of, but you can see that there are a big split upon here and a lot of classes. There is a variety to it all. A big one. So, where does the variety in a class do it? If I'm playing a standard fighter, my standard fighter, if it's a human just like your human, comes into the real big differences where? What you choose for your powers. That defines your character and how your character works so significantly, because a lot of the powers work differently than each other. Many of them have special abilities connected with it, so that your dailies, your encounter ones, your utilities, and your at-wills all make a vast difference on how your version of that class works. They still fit in with the theme of your type, and that's very important. A defender is still a defender no matter what kind of build you do, but the different types of defenders will have different builds. I can take, for example, if again we kind of go back over here for a moment, let's talk about a defender that I knew one very well. Warden. Right here that you can see my mouse on. I had someone play a Warden. Wardens have battlefield manipulation as one of their main abilities. What does that mean? They move enemies around and reposition them into places that are very convenient for your allies and enemies. That is one of their main themes, I've got to be honest. At least the one that my friend, who played one, Blaze, if you are familiar with him from the channel. That's just for people who are long-term people that watch on my Twitch side. Wink, wink. He played a Warden. He was able to have this combination of things that built out in such a way that made him that he manipulated the battlefield and kept the enemies in places that were convenient for all of us. I played a Warlock. We had a Barbarian. We had a lot of power on our side then to make up for that. The Barbarian and the Warlock, we smashed things pretty heavily then. We took advantage of the situation to blast a lot of stuff in our characters' builds. So, as the Warden, he was able to basically keep our team in control and allow us to, in a way, keep us going. It was a very interesting thing that the situation he filled was very different than what you would think for just defending. Because he had a little bit of battlefield control. It's not like what a controller does, blasting multiple enemies, but that battlefield control gave us situations that were at an advantage. And again, that harkens back to where these classes have a variety between them, and the way that they work, the materials that they do. It's this combination of each having their own kind of version of doing the same thing with little bits of uniqueness in them that make the classes unique, combined with then the choices you make in abilities. So I'm not going to say choosing a species/race doesn't make a difference. It technically does. If I start out with something that gets a negative to the ability score I need to use, I'm putting myself at a huge disadvantage. And unfortunately, I have to say, 4th edition is the system that, of all the systems, it's the worst when it comes to that kind of thing. I'll take example of the character I played for a long time when I was doing 4th edition. I played a warlock, a tiefling warlock. Now, I had a mixture of abilities that were intelligence-based and charisma-based, because that's what warlocks do. Technically, you're supposed to focus on one or the other, but you can choose from between both of them for points of time. I chose some charisma-based ones not because I would have a better advantage on affecting enemies, but the effects that they would give me, whether success or failure of my enemies, were helpful enough to keep me going. And that was kind of the things. I combined those things with my feats to create an interesting thing. Like, I had a ability that was successful here and there, Chains of Levistus. It was one of my, because I was a Fiendish one, that's the intelligence-based one, Fiendish Warlock. It was a level 1 encounter power. Later on in my character's build, I could take a feat that if I missed my encounter powers, I could take damage equal to the level of the ability I had and get it back. Meaning I could keep spamming out that level 1, and every time I missed, I could get it back to try again another turn, which would be a lot more damage than just my Eldritch Blast. And see, that's the kind of build I went for. And then, what did I do when I got to my 10th level? Rather than taking a Warlock next step in your class, I took a Sorcerer. I'd taken the hybrid feats that were in the original book here, but for Sorcerer, and I was in Frost Sorcerer Warlock then, which was something you were allowed to do if you took like the right set of feats and abilities and stuff. Not because the abilities were very hard for opponents to miss or affect, but because the secondary effects and a lot of the other abilities I got in connection with being this Frost Sorcerer were very powerful for my character. Now, we ended around level 11, 12, so I didn't really get to play it that much. But I'm saying here, that's the kind of thing you have to think about for builds. Builds for 4E. And the thing is, we were building before the back end of a lot of these things. Again, let's go back to that class list. That class list is pretty big here. I'm going to tell you, we barely got into Player's Handbook 3 by the time we finished playing 4E and switched to Pathfinder. It was around that time there where things like the Battle Mind were out. I'll go by. So we had encountered all the original Player's Handbook 2 stuff, and we had seen some of the Player's Handbook 3 stuff. We had someone play for a little bit a Blade Singer. Was it Blade Singer? No, it was the Sword Mage from that there. And of course, Artificer was out by that time. But we had Player's Handbook 1, Player's Handbook 2. You know, we had these books that were definitely books that we used. And Player's Handbook 3 did come out. But we moved on to Pathfinder because it was the new thing that was really out, and it, as much as we enjoyed 4E, it was very different. As I've always said, it's different, and also the game we had was having some issues and scheduling, and kind of had half broken down, so when the person that was running it basically was having trouble running it, someone else came in with like, hey, I've got Pathfinder, do you want to play that? And that was a better excuse, because the person that was running it then could have a character and not have to be there every session. But anything past 2010, we really didn't see. 2011, the Heroes books, which introduced a bunch of things. And even though Player's Handbook 3 was out, we really didn't dive into it. That was kind of after our time period, even then still. There's a complexity to this entire thing. And I hope you're getting an idea about that complexity. That is actually really good. You always kind of fill that same role. Except for that one class that's like 2, but that's a unique class. We don't talk about it that much. We saw it when we talked about it there for a second, but you know, it's a unique thing. It's not an own thing to a degree, you know. Alright. So here's where I could dive into a little bit more about all these different classes, and that's possible. But again, like, I'm not doing a class guide here per se. I can talk about some of these classes and about how they kind of work a little bit, but maybe we should kind of take a look at some of the different ones as examples from some of these different books to give you an idea about them. So let's go over here and let's take, at least from these first two, ones I'm familiar with. We'll take Warlock from this one. We'll take from Player's Handbook 2. We'll take the Warden, because I was talking about that. We'll choose maybe a controller from Player's Handbook 3? We take a controller. The Scion. Scion's an interesting one. Psionic power. Oh, yeah, there's another thing I can talk about. And then maybe we'll take a look at one of the unique books. Oh, a leader? We can talk about the Artificer from Eberron book. There you go. So we'll hit Artificer, Striker, Defender, Striker. Oh, we need a Striker from Player's Handbook 3. Because we have control? Warden? Warden was the leader. Warden's a Defender. I'm a Striker. My brain's not working today. Leader, Controller. Yeah, okay, so it's Controller, so it is Sun. So those are the ones we'll do. Anyway, boop. We'll go that over. We can put this down for you. Let's go to then Warlock. Take a look at Warlock. Now, the other thing is, a lot of stuff was added for these, and that was one of those things that you can talk about for a lot of the books that came out after now. The earliest classes got more. So if you're playing a cleric, fighter, paladin, ranger, rogue, warlock, warlord, wizard, you might have some stuff from multiple books. So I should talk power sources, though. Power sources are sort of important, but not. Actually, we can go back up over to here for a second and sort by power sources. That was what I was going to mention. So, power sources. It's just how things interact. They've got a lot of arcane, divine, martial. Those were all the original ones. Primal was one that was added. That's like, you know, druids, wardens, barbarians. A lot of stuff from Player's Handbook 2. And Shadow was added for like the assassins and Heroes of the Shadow and stuff into like that. Shadow really only showed... Psionic showed up in Player's Handbook 3. Shadow only really showed up in the Dragon magazines, but they were all the 5 sources. They opened up that they could have added more sources, but really they only added like 2 more. Player's Handbook. Again, Shadow sort of was there with the Dragon magazines. It was mainly the 3 from the original book and the 2 that were added in Player's Handbooks 2 and Player's Handbooks 3. But you can see Sorcerer was added, Player's Handbook 2. So my build wouldn't have existed without Player's Handbook 2. Yeah. Warlock. We'll talk about a little bit to kind of give an example. I should have muted that. I keep forgetting sometimes to mute when I blow my nose. I was talking at the beginning of this, I had a little bit of a cold. So, sorry folks for the small, real-life interruption. Anyway, all this stuff that's on here we're not going to worry about it. We're not having class guide. We're looking at the class to talk about how it kind of works. Deceptive Warlock, Scourge Warlock, that's kind of just bleh. Eldritch Pact is where where it determines your warlockiness, you know? Because Fey Pact relies on charisma, Infernal Pact relies on intelligence. I think Star Pact is also charisma. Oh, I forgot about Star Pact. There are other packs I think that come out. Let me check Star. Star is Constitution? Constitution versus Fortitude. Is Star really Constitution? God. Freeze, Charisma. Oh no, Hellish Rebuke was Constitution too? I thought it was Intelligence. Charisma and Constitution. Oh, it was Charisma and Constitution! Oh, I'm trying to think it's Intelligence, but it was Constitution. I had a really high Constitution. Oh my god. That's me being forgetful. Sorry about that, everybody. That correction from earlier. I forgot that Infernal Warlocks were more Constitution, and Star Warlocks are both. That's why Star... Okay, so Star's kind of in the middle, so you can take a little bit of Star abilities very easily, but, like, picking Fey abilities would be very difficult. Anyway, let's take a look at, like, Eldritch Blast. Everybody got it. Like, Hellish Rebuke. There's that one there. It's a Constitution-based one. Not Intelligence, because I was wrong on it. It's Constitution or Charisma. I did a Constitution build as my Tiefling Warlock. I had to remember that. I didn't. My bad. But notice that there isn't the ability I mentioned here. I think what we can do is... Let me switch to this very easily. Player's Handbook 2. We'll see if OBS cooperates now with me a little bit here. So if I minimize it, where did that come from? Chains of Levistus. It might be from a book I'm not even thinking about, too. It wasn't a daily, was it? No. See, this is me not remembering what... Okay. Long story short, to add this here. D&D 4E Chains of Levistus. Arcane Power! That's where it came in. Okay. Thank you, book. Thank you, search. Okay. The great thing about D&D 4E is there was a actual online tool that you could use that referenced all the abilities from a lot of different sources. There was an actual character builder for 4E. That was online. It was really good. We used it a lot. Where are you, Arcane Power? There you are! So, if I... minimize that. Does that switch? No. No, it doesn't. So I'll have to switch it manually. We'll switch it manually. Here we go. We'll check out Chains of Levistus. I knew today might be a little bit of a scuff, but you know, Chains of Levistus. There it is. That's what I used. It's a Warlock Constitution one. So the thing about these is, if you look, they are not specifically bound to a certain pact. They introduced the Vestige pack. So there's a new pack in here. And this book also had sorcerers, sword mages, bards, wizards, other arcane options. So they did do these books that were the Arcane Power, Martial Power, Primal Power, and Divine Power. I think they had a Psionic Power too? They might have. They did have a Psionic Power too. They didn't have Shadow Power because, again, that was only really Dragon Magazine. But the 5 main powers got power books, which basically after each was introduced, gave more stuff for these various classes and stuff. So it gave more options into for your characters. Yes, these are mostly Vestige, but Chains of Levistus, there it is. 2d6 Constitution plus cold modifier. If the target moves before the end of your turn, takes an extra 2d6 cold damage. And then it's got a special bonus if you're Infernal Pack. If the target moves before the end of your next turn, you also get +2 power bonus to your next attack roll against the target. So that's what a lot of these ones had. They gave you extra bonus. Oh, there's also the Dark Pack they mentioned. So there is more packs out there. That's something that some of these powers did give, was they do a certain thing, but if you had a certain pack, you get an extra bonus to them. Meaning that this is better for this pack. And not all of them had that. Something like Spirit's War Call doesn't have that particular bonus. It's just what it is. But again, like Chains of Levistus, works really well for Infernal Pact, and it would give me that +2 bonus. And again, here's where, coming into the classes and talking about them, the numbers mean a lot. The little numbers mean a lot in 4th edition, and that's why playing something that gets a negative to your ability score that you'd be using for your class is detrimental. Granted, I wasn't going to go back to it, but let's go back to it. As you can see, there are some classes that get multiple options. That helps. Warlock giving Con and Charisma really do help. But then there's a lot of classes where if I look at the main ability scores, they're just Charisma, just Dex, just Intelligence, just Strength, just Wisdom. Interesting that the only one that actually uses... there's a few that uses Con other than Warlock, but Warlock is most of the ones. 2 of the Psionics use Con, too. Con really is used a lot. But if I get a penalty to Intelligence, if I get a penalty to Dexterity, playing a Monk is automatically worse. If I get penalty to Intelligence, playing an Artificer is automatically worse. If I get penalty to Strength, playing a Fighter or Barbarian is automatically worse. A Warden. Again, here's some more multiples, like Ranger and stuff, too. But if you get penalty to Wisdom, playing an Invoker or a Druid or Shaman is worse. It's the unfortunate thing that you are reliant on your ability score much more heavily, and the numbers matter heavily. But that's arcane power there for a moment, just to show you Chains of Levistus. I remembered that's what it was, because I'm smirked. But that's one of the things I took. That was my first level encounter power. I can't remember a lot of my other powers I took. I'm going to be honest. When we get into the utilities and stuff like that, I took a bunch from a lot of different places. I think I took like Ethereal Stride from the Star because it was a teleportation. That was a move action that gave you bonuses to your defenses. That's pretty damn good. It was very helpful. You can see it down here, down at the bottom. But, you know, we went through it and we took a lot. Shouldn't have closed up too quickly, did I? Didn't. There it is. Now, just to show off a little bit more of my character's build, and to explain things a little bit more, here's the Blizzard Mage that I took. And yes, this is broken down into me breaking down a class I took. This was the one I took, because, like, you gained Icy Action, Walk Through Winter. I think this is the one I took, the Blizzard Mage. Winter's Clutch. Cloak of the Freezing Wind. Cloak of the Freezing Wind was really good. Winter's Clutch might have not been important. I can't remember. This might have been the one I took for Sis. Again, it's remembering stuff from the old days. But again, you look at all these powers and introduce new powers in Arcane Power and other sources, and you're already adding more to your character's options. And again, a lot of these are damage-based. Eldritch Blast. Here, it's a very damage-based ability. It's a D10 plus Charisma or Constitution. It's meant to just strike things. It's got a lot of powers which do a bunch of damage very rapidly. You know, that's the point of the class, is to be blaster. And I think that's an important part about trying to explain it here, is that's what I was. I was a blaster. I blew up things, did a lot of damage, smashed things, you know, just shocked them all. That was the point. Let's take a look at Warden, though. Something that I didn't play, but a friend of mine played. Let me adjust that. Not right size. That's the right size. Let's go to Warden. A primal class. Now, again, he multi-classed a little bit to get, like, a animal companion from a druid, I think it was, because it did help with some of his abilities and stuff, too. And control. But, is he an Earth Warden? You chose, like, Earth or Wild, and then you gained a bunch of abilities, and your at-will evocations, give you, like, bonuses to strength. You pull a target with Thorn Strike. So, it's bonuses to your bonus, and then control, while also doing things that will help heal your allies. So you got the class features, Warden's Fury, Warden's Grasp. Enemy marked within you, you know, if it doesn't attack you, it's slowed. It's controlling it and kind of drawing it to you a little bit. Granting advantage to you and your allies the next turn. Advantage works differently in 4th edition. Again, manipulating targets in a lot of ways, moving things around. There's a lot of stuff to a Warden that kind of like keeping them from moving, keeping them in place, slowing them down, moving them to various spots. It's a lot of battlefield manipulation that is the leader role here in this case. They are doing things that effectively allow the battle to be under control by them, by either forcing enemies to do certain things, to move certain ways, not to move at all, to make difficulty for them to move. All these different things, depending on the build you take, make sure that you have a control of the battlefield that is what a leader role should do. The controller is meant to hit multiple targets. The leader is meant to control the battlefield. Yes, the language matches because controller is a really terrible word for someone that just blasts multiple enemies. The idea of the leader is also to do things to help your allies stuff too. Yeah, and like Triumph of Vigor, regaining some hit points and stuff. And there's some other abilities that can also help your allies out for things like some healing and stuff too. But a Warden is a leader that's a lot less healy than, let's say, like a Cleric would be. A Cleric would be much more of a healer, keeping people's hit points up and such like that. A Warden somewhere in between the two of them, or not Warden, thanks for working, brain, for just a second. Don't mind me. Don't mind me. Oh, leader that I want to mention the name of. Where are you on this list? Warlord. The Warlord. There you go. Warlord. The Warlord is somewhere in between, which has a little bit of all these things. But, like, again, Warden has, like, primal elemental manipulations using thorns and vines and stuff like that. And he combined that with the ability to have some, like, it actually might have been a shaman power, not a ranger druid power, because he had a spirit cat, I think it was, and I think that's shaman that has that, maybe. So it's sort of like druid, except spiritual. I'd have to actually look at his build and talk to him about his old build. Again, it's sort of like me remembering my complete old build. But again, I'm trying to use these as an example, trying to explain to you kind of the role a leader takes and the importance of a leader. A leader keeps the battlefield under control and manipulates the battlefield as needed to keep their allies at the most advantageous situation. Whether that's healing, you know, doing stuff to the enemies, anything like that. That's what comes down to a Warden. The Warlock, as I showed it, was meant to just blow things up with arcane power and abilities that do a lot of damage. And it's meant to be at more range, too, so there are melee strikers, something more like a rogue is a melee striker. A ranger can be either melee or ranged, but Warlock was a straight-up range striker. And again, that's another thing that melee and range make a big difference, too, for character builds. I didn't even hint on that when it comes down to classes, because a melee ranger is much different than a ranged ranger, and both do very similar things. Yeah, so you're seeing already how different a lot of stuff here is. And how these roles are incredibly important on the way a lot of characters are built and a lot of, honestly, you think about your classes and stuff. So, we were going to talk about Psion here, we said. Sonic powers as a controller. What? Or we're going to do Striker and Foot, because the Eberron guy gave us Artificer. With the lead. Did we just do a leader? No, Warden's Defender. Oh my fucking god. That's right. Warden is Defender. I think. Right? Yes. So Warden is actually going to be in melee combat. They're a defender. I'm just putting them as a leader. Oh my god. I'm sorry, everybody. My brain is not working today. I've been trying to explain it in a way, and I was comparing them to other leaders, and they're really defender. So, it works the same way as I was trying to talk about it, but, you know, it's meant for the defender role, not the leader role. I was thinking of comparing it to the others and kind of putting it in the middle, because they don't really get a lot of healing abilities at all, and I was thinking that was weird. But really, leaders would get more healing abilities. So we really have to talk about this as a defender kind of thing, so ignore part of my conversation here, because my brain has been a little bit fried. If you were here for the pre-show, I'm kind of sick. But I'm trying to do the show because I know you want more content out there, and so I apologize for it. But it's the same kind of ideas, that they control kind of things and control the enemy. I think that's where a defender comes in, is they control an enemy. There is a bit of control that 3 of the classes do on the battlefield. Actually, all classes control the battlefield in a different way. I think that's the best way to talk about it. The controller keeps the enemy numbers down. The striker eliminates key enemies that really should be eliminated. The Warden keeps the enemies in their sphere of influence, while the leader basically controls the strength of their allies. And these 4 different ways of controlling things come down to the kind of situation you're in. So the idea of control still works for my rolling Wardens here with a brain fart. I'm comical. And you get this stuff when you get it live. Thank you very much. Because I do record these live and don't really do heavy editing sometimes. I probably should, but it's a lot of work to edit. I've been there. Go enjoy my old edited videos. Those burnt me crap out very much so. There's some good ones back then. Anyway, my idea that a Warden controls the battlefield to a bit by controlling the enemies. That's what a defender does, actually. So, I said the right thing. I just was putting it to a different group than I really should have. All the stuff I said about controlling enemies, keeping them situated, you know, keeping them focused on the queue and stuff, that's actually defender stuff. It's all correct. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about a leader. Let's actually talk about a leader. That's probably a good thing. That way I can actually give a good comparison to things here. And we can kind of take a step back from the insanity and look at an artificer. So. Yeah. Don't mind the insane person that's kind of hiding behind you. So, there we come down to the role of the leader. They say it very obviously right here. The leader's role is to empower allies and hinder enemies. that's a great way of describing it, because unlike your defender, which is supposed to kind of control the enemies, keep them in the places you want to, manipulate their locations, keep them focused on you, a striker, which is meant to kind of do big damage outputs to a single enemy and hamper them to prevent them from counterattacking, but also, like, you know, keep them manipulated that way. Here on this end here, you have things like, you know, Arcane Rejuvenation, which you can spend time infusing your allies with curative energies. And Artificers use magic items a lot. Whenever one leader uses a magic item's daily item, absorbs energy, temporary hit points, healing infusions, which do different infusions to heal your enemies, your allies, some creatures and stuff like that. But we'll just take a look here for some other things. They do have melee or ranged for a bunch of these, so you could be a melee Artificer or a ranged Artificer. I'm going to mute myself for a second to blow my nose, because again, we're maybe coming down with one. Hard to say. They're intelligence-based, so you can very easily see that there. Things like Magic Weapon deals damage, and allies adjacent to the target gain bonuses. Static Shock deals damage, and then they take a penalty to damage rolls. Thundering Armor. You give a target a bonus to AC, and then you make an attack. And the secondary target kind of does some stuff too. Which, you know, you give someone some bonuses and also hit someone that's, like, next to them. Or the Aggravating Force, hit something and then the next ally gets a bonus to hit them. That's the entire point of this kind of build, is you're doing some healing as a leader, and you're also giving bonuses to, or penalties to your enemies. So, where the defender held the battlefield and manipulated positioning, which is very important in 4E, an Artificer gives bonuses or penalties to the various targets, and also possible healing and stuff like that too, which are all very good. They basically keep your team going in combat by that way. And yes, they don't have as many probably direct heals as, let's say, a cleric would for in combat. I can technically point out, as a leader type, a cleric will have a lot more to do to heal. Much more so than this here. But it doesn't mean there are places that don't heal, and the entire idea of the leader exists here. Yes, they bring about healing. Yes, they bring about bonuses or penalties. These are both very important things to how a Artificer works, and a leader in general works. They manipulate the battlefield through their allies. You know, the other three manipulate the battlefield through fighting enemies. You know, and you just have to see that the battlefield manipulation is very important. Environment is very important, and one of the reasons that, honestly, 4th edition failed, I've talked about it before, is the lack of a fucking VTT, because this is a game you have to really play on a map. It's the major disadvantage of 4E. I've talked about it before, but this is bringing it in, especially now that I've gotten this far into talking about the classes, and how the importance of manipulating the battle and the circumstances of the battle are for all the characters. The situation in the battle itself is such an integral part about it that actually affects your classes too, because your classes are going to be deeply connected with that kind of ingrained institution of what's going on with the battle. You know, whatever the situation is, are there traps, are there hazards, are there difficult terrain, where are the enemies, how's the room shaped? All these make huge differences, how all these classes work and maintain themselves. What's the vision? These are all important questions that you really need a map for, and that's why failure to have a VTT of any kind during this time period really was a death knell on 4th edition before it began. And nowadays, I'm going to tell you the best way to play 4th edition is online. I played it in person. I built maps in person. It wasn't easy. Recreating maps from books is what we were doing. We were playing through some of the pre-made adventures. But it worked. We did it. It's just that nowadays you can play and enjoy this game so much more than what it was. And understanding the system, I'm trying to tell you here, this class discussion, to make it sound interesting to you, because I do think 4th edition is a very interesting game and not a bad game to play. It's just, it's a game made for now, not when it was made. And it really is its own system. It is the 4th edition of D&D because it was the 4th one and Wizards of the Coast put it out. But it's not D&D. It's something else that's kind of connected to D&D's world. It's its own unique system. We can call it the 4E system. It's unique. It's interesting. You take it for a grain of salt as its own thing. There's so much more to it. And again, that VTT makes these abilities to manipulate the battle make a difference. And it makes sense then. Everything the Warden can do to move enemies around, keep them slow, keep them focused, keep them moving, is all based around movement, squares, and knowing where things are. Similarly, a lot of other classes have those abilities. Movement is key. Manipulation of the battlefield is key. And talking about a leader here, talking about an artificer. We'll go back up to the artificer picture. It's important because they are doing a huge job of basically ensuring their fellow characters are functioning right, are in the best shape, get bonuses, hit the targets, take out the enemies, and stay alive. That's what a leader does. And Artificer is just one of many leaders. And yes, they deal with things with magic items, they deal with their own unique abilities. You know, every leader has its unique flavor. Every striker has its unique flavor. Every defender has its unique flavor. Every controller has its unique flavor. All the unique flavors of these characters make a difference on how they play, combined with, yes, a little bit from your species/race, not that much, but a little bit, and a lot on the powers you choose. You can choose a series of powers that work very similar to each other, that kind of form a build and are unique to you, and because you have a choice at these different levels, it makes a difference. And I think that's another thing I have to kind of infuse here. At the different levels, these different groupings, you at most choose one or two. That's it. That's all you choose from. You can sometimes choose older abilities, but basically at different levels, you choose an encounter power from the new list, which are probably going to be the best ones you can choose, or sometimes there's utility powers, daily powers, or whatever of that level, which might not work best for your build, and you might take an earlier one. That's happened. But it's not unusual that you would never do that. You'd only have one from these various lists at the different levels that they're unlocked. Let's talk about controllers, though, to finish up today. Because we really should. Go to Player's Handbook 3. Gotta readjust it, because of course it's, you know, super zoomed in. Like the other one. Let's go to Psion. A controller. Controllers, in this case, a Psion controller, mentally influences the action of your foes, toss enemies around the battlefield with psychic force. Remember, the idea of a controller is to hit multiple enemies, to basically dwindle enemy numbers, take out minions. That's where controllers come in, because there is the minion enemy builds, the one-hit enemies which exist at all levels, that can still do a lot of damage, are still very deadly, and basically, you know, are little ones that you're meant to, like, slash away, if you can hit them. They're the one-hit enemies, and they're a danger, and controllers are meant to cut down numbers, or keep numbers at bay, until your strikers can take them out, or your defenders can get in place, and keep your leaders safe. Controllers are, again, forming an important part of this entire role. it's not as important as the other 3 roles are. I'm going to admit that just by looking at the way these roles function. But it still can be very important to have a controller. And these are the manipulators of psionic power. This is if you're going to look into the psionic power source. A psion is honestly where you go into with this entire thing. And they do have different kind of versions of them, class features of a bunch of different abilities. Let's just take a look at things like these at-will disciplines here. Their at-will powers and kind of get an idea about them. Do some damage. In an area burst. Dishearten. Does a little bit of damage, and people take penalties. So you're doing the 2 things you're doing. You're doing area damage, but you're also giving penalties. And they do have the augmentations. We're not going to get into psionic augmentations and stuff like that today. We're not deeping into psionics, into psions in general too. Force punch. Now, it is a melee one. It hits the one target. You push the target, and you also push other enemies away. So it's like a big thing. If you're getting surrounded, you knock them back. Telekinetic trawl. You do damage at range, and you pull the target. Hide memory. You do damage at range, and you become invisible to the target. Mind thrust. You do damage, and you can use the power as a ranged basic attack for purposes of ranged basic attacks when it fills in with other powers and abilities and stuff too. And that's an important thing to kind of mention there. Ranged basic attacks are a thing. That's like just attacking with your weapon. I attack with an axe. I attack with a bow. Those are the basic attacks. So you sometimes get those from different things that we're not getting into that detail there. But that's, again, they have an at-will area effect. They do. And then, you get into their dailies, and, they have a couple areas, bursts, hit targets. Effectively, they do a combination of hitting multiple targets or focusing on targets that they can't take out, but either disabling or affecting in such a way that, manipulates them. And as you can see, Augment 2 for Hide Memory is a burst. Or other augments and stuff like that, do other things too. It's this idea for your scion, for your controller, is that you are... Okay. Strikers are your damage dealers. Defenders are your tanks. They, control the enemies, attract the enemy's attention, do kind of things like that. Leaders give bonuses to your enemies and penalties to your enemies, bonuses to your allies, give healing and stuff. A controller basically targets either areas of creatures to take them out, especially taking out things like minions, or targets specific creatures and affects them in such a way that puts them at a disadvantage for a turn. That's what you have to think about. It makes certain creatures in the group of them that it controls where creatures can do things a little bit. That's the point of it. A controller is like focusing on the enemies of the battlefield completely. A leader is focusing on the entire battlefield, but tends to focus on allies more, occasionally focusing on enemies. A defender focuses on enemies, but doesn't focus on damaging the enemies, just focuses on enemies attacking them, basically becoming a target. And a striker focuses on killing enemies. So you as a controller, yeah, you might take out enemies, but what you're really doing as the controller is ensuring that enemies are kept at bay until they can be hit by the striker, until the defender can get their attention, until the right bonuses can be given by the leader. They form a powerful use in a group. Again, it's not completely needed since some of their role is taken up by other roles, but a particular good controller can turn the tide. can control the situation. I think that's the point of the controller. As everybody has a little bit of control over the battlefield, the controller is meant to particularly control the flow of the battle more than any of the others. That's the importance of a controller. They control the flow of the battle more than any of the others. Yeah, a striker can do a shit ton of damage to a single target, take them out, take them down. That can do a lot. A defender can be the target for a lot of things. Okay, that can do a lot. Your leader can give bonuses to health, bonuses to attack, which can help a lot. But none of that stuff screams, I'm controlling the entire battlefield, and that's what a controller is kind of doing. Targeting multiple things, giving out bonuses and penalties in such a way that, well, mostly penalties, in such a way that keeps the battlefield at a pace that's very helpful to them. And that's where the importance and strength of a controller come in. And you can especially see this with the wills at assign. And I'm not even getting into the dailies or the other powers and stuff like that, because when you get into the other powers, they become more powerful, they have bigger effects, they do more stuff like this. It's just, I'm trying to give you the basic, bare minimum examples that kind of give you an idea about how all this works and manipulates. Whew! I hope that's given you an idea. And that's kind of where I'm going to end today. Maybe we'll actually throw me back in the middle here to talk about it as we've gotten on to the end here. My entire plan today was to give you deeper looks and explanations into how you can look at classes and understand them in 4E. Because looking at 4E mechanically, looking at how to build a character, looking at a lot of these things don't give you a general idea about how the actual game works to a degree. It's one of those things is you can look at the rules of a board game. You can look at the rules of an RPG. But until you try it, you're not actually diving into it heavily. Take a drink of water. Sorry. You're not diving into it to understand what's really going on with it. You need that hands-on experience. And one of the things that you can kind of have trouble with 4E is understanding these combination of four things for every class. You combine what class it is. It makes a big difference. You combine your role, you combine your power source, and then you combine what powers you choose. Two of these are chosen for whatever class you're choosing to play. Power source and role. And those are more generic things that are shared between classes. And power source, again, it doesn't come up a lot, that's a matter of a thing, but it is a thing to keep in mind. Role is important. Understanding what your role is, understanding what it means to be that role. What do I mean by being a leader? What do I mean by being a defender? What do I mean by being a striker? What do I mean by being a controller? Something like a barbarian berserker, which is both a striker and defender, is a unique situation, which some of them do exist. Some of them have multiple power sources. There are unique ones which are unique and interesting. Some of the hybrid stuffs are very interesting that were introduced in later books. But just taking Player's Handbook 1 and maybe Player's Handbook 2, and just having those two books will introduce you to a lot of what the classes are. I technically like a lot of stuff from Player's Handbook 2. That's kind of why I put it in there in that one. But even then, just the Player's Handbook 1 stuff gives you a lot. Not really a lot of controls. But what I mean is, there are a lot of classes and class versions that have been introduced. Let me just put this over me once more for a second, just to scroll through the entire thing. Just as a quick showing of it. That's the list. That's the list. It's a heck of a list. It is a bunch of stuff that they introduced in a lot of books over time, over a couple of years. It feels like a lot. But they're all interesting, unique, they do different ways of doing things. And understanding the basic role you're going to fill, it helps you out to understand your character. And understand when a power is better or worse for the situation you're building into. You can build any kind of set of power combined. You can take this certain at will, this certain daily, this certain utility, this certain encounter power, and they could all work together. But understanding a flow between them and similarities in the way that you do things and the way that you manipulate the battlefield. If you choose to be a warden that moves people around and keeps them in places while keeping them marked, yeah, that's what you choose. If you choose a striker that's meant to do a lot of chip damage to a single target, rather than maybe a big hit to one target and his surrounding allies. Those are two different builds. Being a controller that basically does damage to an area. Being a leader that focuses on healings and buffs to your allies. All of these things are various versions of it, and you can probably have most of these builds under most versions of these classes. So that's another thing, is like, I can be that version of this as a warden, or a warlord, as a artificer, as a cleric. I can be that version of it as a fighter, a paladin, a warden. I can be that version of it as a ranger, rogue, warlock. It's important to see that it doesn't really matter the class for the role, as long as you know your role as that class. And once you know what kind of role you're fitting into, and what role you kind of want to fill on the battlefield, there are some options too. Battlefield manipulation can be a leader. It can be a defender. It can be a controller. Doing that big damage could certainly be a controller. Definitely a striker, but even a defender will do some damage. You can find and manipulate the location that you do some of these things and kind of fill your gaps in, and understand that you, unfortunately in 4E, need that power balance of classes a little bit more. And as I said at the beginning, really only 3 of them. Controller's not as important, but really, you really need that team of 3 in order to have a fairly successful D&D 4E adventure. You need that defender, you need that leader, you need that striker. Again, you can maybe get away with just defenders and leaders at most, but the striker helps a lot, and then the controller could help too. It's just, a little healing, a little tanking. Those are the kind of core aspects of what you need. You should really at least have one of each of those. So, like, if I was going to do, like, a duo game, I'd have a defender and a leader. And you'd probably make okay at that point in time with a duo character team. Triple, I'd add the striker. And after that, whatever people want to play. Multiple strikers, multiple defenders, multiple leaders. Really hard to die with multiple leaders. A lot of healing. Multiple defenders. The enemies are just going to be targeting those two. Multiple strikers doing a lot of damage. A couple, go up to 5 players, have a couple of controllers. That might help too. Anyway. There's a bit of rambling in on my entire thing, but this was a unique video I wanted to do on D&D 4E, and I hope it helps you get an idea on D&D 4E a little bit better, and maybe be a little bit more interested in checking it out. That's all I can hope. Anyway, I'm going to get going. I'm going to give my outro of stuff. Remember, I'm on Twitch and YouTube. If you want to catch me live on Twitch, I stream and record this every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Tuesdays, Thursdays, usually early afternoon, between 1 and 2. Give and take for family stuff. Pretty on schedule for around 11 o'clock on Saturday mornings. World of Darkness stuff tends to be Saturday. Pathfinder stuff / Galarian stuff tends to be on Thursday. Miscellaneous stuff tends to be on Tuesday. Other tabletop stuff, Crimson Queens, every Wednesday at 9 p.m. That's a live play of Pathfinder 1E. Go check that out. Discussing tabletop on Saturdays at 6 p.m. I do gaming streams on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Check this out if you want to. Everything that's so tabletop related goes up on YouTube a number of days later. If you want to see social media, Discord, Twitter.com, our link below. Best ways to support the channels are, of course, if you're following on Twitch. Actually, well, if you're on Twitch, actually giving a follow. Really great. That's the easiest way to do it. If you're on YouTube, a few more steps, but they're just as easy. That's hit the subscribe button, hit the like, leave a comment, set the bell to, like, all things. And the comment for today is, what's your favorite role in D&D 4e? Which of these 4 roles is the one that you most likely would like to play a lot more, or would be your favorite if you played 4e? Like, which one interests you the most? So, this is a last discussion. But anyway, alright everybody, have a great rest of your day. And until the next time I see you and talk, and of course next time we talk about D&D 4e, maybe we'll do that class guide in the future. Who knows? Until then, I bid you farewell.